Wild West was a hard place. It was a land of dust, heat, and danger. People carried guns not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Some men became heroes. Some became legends, and some became nightmares. Among all the names whispered in fear across the frontier, one stood above the rest. His name was John Joel Glanton, and many believed he was the closest thing to evil the Wild West had ever seen. When people talked about him, their voices went low. Their eyes shifted to the ground. His name carried a heaviness that made even strong men feel cold inside. John Glanton did not become this dark figure overnight. His story was a long, painful road, one filled with violence, choices, and moments that pushed him deeper into darkness. But even at the beginning, there was something different about him. Something sharp, something dangerous, something that would one day explode into pure terror. John Glanton was born around the year 1819. America at that time was not peaceful. It was a country still trying to grow, still trying to survive, and still fighting over land and power. Children in those days did not have soft, quiet lives. They lived close to violence. They saw things no child should ever see, and young Glanton grew up in that kind of world. He learned quickly that life was unfair and often cruel. He saw men fight, steal, lie, and kill. He watched as strong men pushed weak men aside. He learned that kindness did not keep you alive. Toughness did. Violence did. Power did by the time he was a young man. John Glanton already understood the rules of his world. Only the ruthless survive, and he was ready to survive at any cost. When Glanton grew old enough, he joined the Texas Revolution, a wild and bloody conflict where American settlers fought the Mexican government for control of Texas. Many men joined for freedom. Some joined for adventure, but he joined because fighting felt natural to him. The battlefield was a place where he did not have to pretend. He did not have to follow rules. He only had to fight, and he was good at it. The war changed him. It made him sharper, harder, colder. People around him noticed the way he rode into danger without fear. They noticed the way he handled violence, not with excitement, but with a strange calm. For most soldiers, battle was terrifying. But for Glanton, battle felt like home. When the war finally ended, other men celebrated. They went home to their families. They tried to rebuild peaceful lives. But Glanton felt lost. Peace made him restless. The quiet felt wrong. Without danger, without conflict, he felt empty, like a weapon with no target. And so, he drifted. He rode from town to town, carrying nothing but his guns, his knives, and the heavy shadows of his past. He picked up small jobs. He got into fights. He found trouble easily and left it just as fast. People did not trust him. They could sense something inside him, a darkness that made him unpredictable. Some said he carried anger from the war. Some said he carried pain he never talked about. And some said he simply liked violence too much. But Glanton never explained himself. He spoke little. He kept to the edges of camps and saloons. He stared with cold, steady eyes that made people move out of his way. He was a man searching for something he could not name, a purpose, a place, or maybe just an excuse to keep fighting. In those days, the American frontier was a boiling pot of conflict. Settlers pushed deeper into lands that did not belong to them. Tribes fought to defend their homes. Mexico tried to maintain control over territories that were slipping away. Everyone was desperate. Everyone was angry. Everyone was afraid, and fear is a powerful thing. Fear gives birth to bad decisions. Fear creates hatred. Fear opens the door for men like John Glanton. By the late 1840s, the Mexican government was overwhelmed by attacks from Apache warriors. In their desperation, officials made a terrible choice. They began offering bounties, money paid for Apache scalps. It was supposed to be a way to protect villages, to bring peace, to stop raids. But the idea of paying for scalps was a spark thrown into dry grass. It burned fast. It burned uncontrollably. And John Glanton saw the flames. Here was a job that rewarded violence. A job that required no rules. A job that fit him perfectly. At first, scalp hunters were supposed to target raiding Apache warriors. But the bounty system was flawed. There were no checks, no proper laws, no one watching closely. And soon, men realized something dangerous. A scalp was a scalp. Dead was dead. And money did not care about innocence. When Glanton heard this, something inside him woke up. The soldier in him, the fighter in him, the darkness inside him. He rode straight toward the opportunity with a small group of men who were just as hardened and broken as he was. Together, they formed the beginning of what would become known as the Glanton Gang, a group that would soon become one of the most feared forces in the entire Southwest. People did not know it yet, but this was the start of something terrible, a storm that would sweep across the frontier, a storm with John Glanton riding at its center. But this is only the beginning. The road ahead would turn darker, the violence would grow deeper, and the man people feared would become a monster people ran from. John Glanton rode across the dusty plains with the same feeling he had carried since the war, a feeling he could not name, a restlessness that never left him. He was no longer a soldier, but the war still lived inside him. Peace did not comfort him. Peace made him feel lost, like a man walking through a world that had no place for him. After the Texas Revolution, most men tried to rebuild their lives. They found homes, marriages, work, and meaning. They tried to forget the screams and gunfire. They tried to bury the memories. But Glanton was different. The quiet made him uneasy. The silence felt like danger. His mind had grown used to conflict, to the fast beat of fear, to the feeling of life hanging by a thread. Without that, everything felt dull, empty, lifeless. He traveled from town to town, never staying long. Some called him a wanderer. Others called him a troublemaker. But most agreed on one thing. John Glanton was a man whose life was stuck between war and peace. A man who did not know how to live without violence. He worked odd jobs, guarding wagons, hunting animals, tracking runaway criminals. Anything that kept him moving. He fought in saloons more often than most men drank in them. His fists were fast, his temper was short, and his heart seemed hollow. People watched him carefully, not because he bragged or shouted, but because he stayed quiet. To quiet, he had the calm of a man who could explode in a second. There were stories told about him even then. Some said he once rode through a storm of bullets without blinking. Others said he killed a man just for drawing on him to slow. Some said he never slept through a whole night, because nightmares made him wake with his hand on his gun. Whether the stories were true or not didn't matter. His reputation grew like a shadow behind him, long and dark, stretching across the towns he passed. But Glanton did not care about fame. He did not care about fear. He cared only about one thing, movement. As long as he kept riding, he didn't have to think. He didn't have to remember. He didn't have to face the empty place inside his chest. Still, something else was building inside him, something sharper than restlessness. The world around him was shifting. Tension between settlers, tribes, and governments was rising like heat off the desert floor. Everyone was angry. Everyone was nervous. Everyone wanted control. And in times like that, men like Glanton found opportunity. During this period, the Mexican frontier was suffering. Apache warriors, skilled and fearless, were striking without warning. Villages were burned, livestock stolen, families killed. People lived every day with fear in their eyes. The Mexican government, exhausted and desperate, made a decision that would change the frontier forever. They offered money for Apache scalps. It was meant to be a defense measure, a way to fight back, but it became one of the most dangerous ideas ever created. When Glanton heard about the bounty, he didn't hesitate. He rode straight toward the border. This was not just a job to him, it was a calling. It was something he understood, something he could do better than almost anyone alive. Killing, he gathered a few tough men along the way. Some were former soldiers, some were drifters, like him. Some were broken souls who didn't care if they lived or died. Together, they made a rough team of riders with more scars than hope. They ate little, spoke little, and trusted little, but they knew how to fight. Glanton took charge naturally. He didn't ask permission. He didn't vote. He simply acted, and the others followed. There was something about his presence, something cold and certain. He didn't lead through kindness or respect. He led through force, through the unspoken truth that no one in that group wanted to challenge him. At first, they hunted Apache warriors as the bounty system intended. They tracked them through mountains and deserts, ambushed them near rivers, and fought with the desperate ferocity of men who had nothing to lose. Each scalp they brought back earned them money. Not much, but enough to keep them riding. But the bounty system had no rules, no identification checks, no real oversight, and that opened a door that men like Glanton were all too willing to walk through. Because once a scalp was cut from a head, no one could say who it belonged to. Slowly, quietly, the line between war and murder began to fade. Travelers went missing. Small villages vanished. People whispered about white riders who struck at dawn, who left no witnesses, who killed not for survival, but for money. Some said they saw Glanton riding with blood on his clothes. Some said they saw him smiling after a fight. And still, his reputation grew. But behind that growing darkness, there was something else happening, something inside Glanton himself. He was changing, hardening. He was not simply fighting enemies now. He was feeding a deep hunger he did not fully understand, a hunger for danger, a hunger for control, a hunger for fear. That hunger would soon twist him into something. Worse than an outlaw, it would turn him into a monster. But for now, the transformation was just beginning. The quiet soldier had become a restless drifter. The drifter had become a hunter. And the hunter was about to become the leader of a gang that would terrify the entire frontier. The Glanton gang was rising, step by step, mile by mile, and every mile carried them closer to the darkness waiting ahead. This was only the second chapter of John Glanton's journey. The worst was still to come. The desert sun burned like a fire in the sky, and the land below it carried the same heat, dry, harsh, and unforgiving. This land shaped the men who lived on it, and for John Glanton, it shaped him into something even he did not expect. After gathering a small crew of hardened riders, Glanton rode deep into the frontier, where the only law was survival, and the only truth was the barrel of a gun. His men were rough, hungry, and desperate. They had no families, no homes, no dreams beyond the next sunrise. Men like that followed the strongest voice, and Glanton's voice, though rarely heard, was powerful. They set out to earn money through the scalp bounty system. At first, everything felt simple to them. Track the raiders, fight hard, bring back proof, get paid. It seemed like a job that suited men who didn't fit anywhere else. But the bounty system was broken, fatally broken. The Mexican authorities paid by the scalp, not by identity. A bloody piece of skin and hair was enough to earn silver. There was no testing, no questions asked, no way to prove anything. And in that terrible loophole, darkness began to grow. During the early days of hunting, Glanton and his men clashed with Apache raiding bands. The fights were brutal, fast, and deadly. The Apaches were skilled warriors who knew the desert better than any outsider. They struck with precision, disappeared like smoke, and made Glanton's early hunts feel like battles against shadows. But Glanton kept pushing forward. Every fight sharpened him, every death hardened him, and every scalp made him feel a little more powerful. Still, something inside him was changing. In the beginning, he spoke of the bounty as work, but soon he stopped calling it work at all. He simply called it collecting. And his eyes, once just cold, began to carry something else, something darker, something hungry. The turning point came on a dry afternoon when the gang rode into a valley where smoke still floated in the air. A settlement had been attacked, homes burned, people killed, fear spread like disease. Glanton studied the scene quietly. His men waited, expecting him to track the raiders, to hunt them down as usual. But he didn't. Single quotes. Instead, Glanton walked among the dead and saw something different, something tempting, something profitable. His men watched as he crouched beside a burned body. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He just reached for his knife. That was the moment everything changed. The others knew what he was thinking, even without words. If dead settlers could bring the same bounty as Apache warriors, if no one asked questions, if no one checked identities, then why chase warriors across the mountains when money lay still and silent at their feet? A long, uneasy silence drifted through the valley. The sun hung overhead like a judge. The wind brushed past them like a warning, but no warnings were heard. Glanton stood up slowly, holding a fresh scalp in his hand. His voice was calm when he spoke, as if this was just another day. "A scalp is a scalp," he said. His men stared at him. Some swallowed hard. Some hesitated. But one by one, they followed their leader. They took out their knives. They crossed a line they could never return from. The gang walked into that valley as hunters, and walked out as something far worse. Monsters. From that day on, no road was safe. No village was safe. No traveler was safe. The Glanton gang no longer cared about enemies or targets. They cared about opportunity. If you crossed their path, you might not cross another. Wherever they rode, fear traveled ahead of them. The small towns near the border began to whisper about the pale riders, who arrived with calm faces and left behind death. Farmers disappeared. Merchants vanished. Caravans were found abandoned, with horses tied to trees and nothing left behind but the smell of blood. Every scalp the gang delivered made the bounty system weaker. The more silver they collected, the more reckless they became. Glanton led them with a dead stare that frightened even his own men. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice carried finality. He made decisions without regret. He killed without hesitation. Sometimes, at night, when the men sat around the fire, they would glance toward Glanton and wonder if he felt anything, any more fear, guilt, remorse, or if he had cut out those parts of himself long ago. He never smiled. He never relaxed. He never let down his guard. It was as if he believed danger lived inside him, not outside. But there was something else happening too. The more the gang killed, the more powerful Glanton felt. The more he controlled his men, the more he controlled his world. Every act of violence fed his confidence. Every scalp fed his greed. And soon, the gang's violence grew so extreme that even those who had hired the Mexican officials, businessmen, ranch owners, began to fear them. The Apaches, once hunted, learned to hunt the hunters. They tracked Glanton's movements. They studied his routes. They struck back with fierce resistance. But Glanton reacted like a man who could no longer see danger, only opportunity. Every fight hardened him more. Every escape made him feel untouchable, and the men behind him followed, deeper into darkness because they believed he could not be stopped. But the world was watching, and whispers spread across the desert. A storm was gathering, a storm of anger, vengeance, and destruction, and this storm would soon collide with the man who believed he could outrun everything. John Glanton didn't know it yet, but his path was moving toward something greater than greed, something deadlier than gunfire, something that would decide the fate of his entire gang. The bounty system had turned him into a monster, but monsters rarely live long. The rise of the Glanton gang did not happen in one day. It happened slowly, step by step, choice by choice, until the group was no longer a band of broken men, but a force of fear that spread across the frontier like wildfire. And at the center of it all was John Glanton, a man who seemed carved from stone and sharpened by violence. After the first terrible decision in the burned settlement, the men felt the change between them. They did not speak about it, but they felt it. Something invisible hung in the Iran unspoken agreement that the rules had changed forever. They were no longer bound by laws or morals. They were bound only by survival and profit. Glanton noticed this shift. He watched his men closely. Some were nervous. Some were ashamed. Some were excited. But all of them were still there. None of them rode away. That was all he needed to see. Loyalty, even if built on fear, was still loyalty. He stood before them one evening, the firelight painting thin shadows across his face. He did not give speeches. He did not talk about destiny or brotherhood. His voice stayed low, rough, and firm. "There's money out there," he said, "more than we've ever seen. We take it or someone else will." That was all it took. The men nodded. The path ahead was set. From that moment on, they became known as the Glanton gang, a name that soon spread from one dusty town to another with growing fear. Most gangs in the West had codes. They had leaders who limited violence when it hurt business. They had boundaries, hidden values, even strange ethics shaped by the hard life of the frontier. But the Glanton gang was different. Their only rule was simple: do whatever keeps you alive and paid. They rode through the desert like ghosts, fast and merciless. They attacked without warning. They moved without leaving traces. They killed without hesitation. Travelers seeing dust clouds in the distance prayed they were just wild horses, not riders wearing grim expressions and carrying long knives, sharpened for collecting scalps. Glanton himself rode at the front of every attack. He was not a man who hid behind others. He lived for the chaos of battle, the flash of gunfire, the crack of rifles, the shouts carried by the wind. That chaos gave him a feeling of control he never found anywhere else. His men trusted him because he always survived. No matter how dangerous the fight, he came out on the other side, calm and cold, as if death had walked around him instead of through him. The gang's early victories made them bold. To bold Dot in one raid, they overtook a caravan carrying goods across the desert. Instead of negotiating or threatening, Glanton rode straight in, guns blazing. His men followed, each one driven by the same desperate hunger for money and the thrill of power. When the dust settled, the caravan was silent. The only sounds left were the crackling of broken wood and the low whispers of wind through torn fabric. To Glanton, it was just another job. To the frontier, it was a warning. Word spread that the gang was no longer hunting enemies, they were hunting opportunity. Anyone could become a target. Merchants, farmers, families, stagecoaches, small settlements, friendly tribes, even people who had never heard of Glanton before. Fear traveled faster than horses. Towns began locking their gates early. Travelers grouped together in large numbers. Some people stopped traveling entirely. Mexican officials realized, too late, that the bounty system they created had unleashed something uncontrollable. But they did not act, because they feared the gang might turn directly on them. Through all this chaos, John Glanton remained strangely calm. He rarely smiled, but he rarely grew angry. His emotions stayed hidden behind a mask of steady eyes and a firm jaw. His men often watched him from a distance, wondering what he was thinking. But Glanton didn't share his thoughts. He acted, and the world reacted. He made choices quickly, decisively, as if he already knew the outcome. Some nights, when the moon was high and the fire burned low, the men whispered about him. Was he fearless? Was he insane? Was he cursed? No one knew, but everyone agreed on one thing. Glanton was not like other men. He moved with purpose. He killed without hesitation. He rode as if something inside him pushed him forward. Force stronger than greed and darker than anger. The gang grew in number as they rode deeper into the frontier. Drifters joined them. Outcasts joined them. Men who had lost everything joined them. They saw Glanton not as a friend, but as a destiny. Riding with him meant gold, power, and survival. They trusted him more than they trusted themselves, because he seemed carved from certainty. He moved like a man who did not doubt, who did not fear, who did not look back. And in the Wild West, confidence was stronger than laws. But what made Glanton such a powerful leader was not just his strength. It was the darkness inside him, a darkness that allowed him to do what others could not. While other men hesitated, Glanton acted. While others felt guilt, Glanton felt nothing. While others questioned, Glanton decided that the gang followed him deeper into that darkness because they believed he could lead them through anything. With every raid, every scalp, every coin earned, Glanton's gang crossed another invisible line. Lines of morality, lines of humanity, lines that separated men from monsters. Soon, they were so deep into violence that even if they wanted to return to a normal life, they could not. Their hands were too stained. Their faces were too known. Their crimes were too numerous. They had become fugitives of their own choices. But they did not stop. They did not slow down. They rode faster, killed quicker, and followed Glanton with blind loyalty, because by now they weren't just a gang. They were a storm, and storms do not retreat, but storms do collide. And ahead of them was the greatest collision of Outlaw force, powerful enough to confront even the darkest men in the West. The Glanton gang was rising, and the world was preparing to fight back. The desert stretched endlessly under the burning sun, a place that felt alive with heat and silence. Most travelers feared it. Most settlers avoided it. But for the Glanton gang, the desert was home. It was their hunting ground, their hiding place, and their pathway to terror. And under the leadership of John Glanton, that terror grew into a force that spread across the frontier like a sickness. As the gang rode deeper into Mexico, and the borderlands, their violence changed. It no longer came from desperation or survival. It came from confidence. Confidence in their weapons. Confidence in their leader. Confidence in the idea that no one could stop them. And so, the desert became a stage for their cruelty. In those days, the frontier lived in fear. People shared stories around campfires, stories of pale riders who moved like shadows, who attacked without warning, who left behind bodies and silence. Some called them demons. Others called them ghosts. But most knew the truth. They were the Glanton gang. Small villages sat scattered across the land, weak and unprotected. Families lived in tiny houses made of clay and straw, tending animals and crops with quiet hope. These people had very little, but they held on to what they had with dignity. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, the Glanton gang rode into such a village. Chickens scratched in the dirt. Children played near the well. Women washed clothes. It was a peaceful scene too, peaceful for the men who craved chaos. Glanton gave no speech. He raised his hand, and the attack began. Gunfire cracked through the air. Horses screamed. People ran in every direction, crying out to God, to each other, to anyone who might save them. But no one came. The gang moved fast, taking whatever they wanted: food, horses, valuables, and scalps. When the attack ended, the village was silent. Smoke rose from shattered roofs. The bodies of innocent people lay across the dirt. To Glanton, it was another day in the desert. To the people of the frontier, it was a nightmare they could never forget. Word of the attack spread like wildfire, and when one village fell, others feared they would be next. Doors were locked, windows boarded. Families prayed at night with shaking hands. Fear had taken root. The desert roads were long and empty, with only a few stagecoaches and wagon trains moving across the landscape. These travelers were often families searching for a better life or merchants carrying goods to sell. They believed in the promise of the frontier, but that promise was a lie for many. The Glanton gang hunted these travelers like wolves hunting deer. They hid behind boulders, waited in ravines, and charged from behind dust clouds. The attacks were fast and brutal. Sometimes the gang robbed the travelers and let them go. Sometimes they killed everyone and took everything. Sometimes they killed only because silence made them uneasy. People began traveling in large groups, hoping that greater numbers meant greater safety. But even groups were no match for the gang's ruthless tactics. Once, a caravan of 7 wagons was found abandoned in the sand. The wagons were broken. The horses were gone. The travelers had disappeared completely. No one knew if they had been killed, kidnapped, or lost to the desert. But everyone feared the same answer, and the Glanton gang kept riding. John Glanton did not show anger or joy during these attacks. He remained cold, steady, and focused. His men sometimes looked at him, hoping to see some sign of emotion, anything, to prove he was still human. But they saw nothing. He gave orders with a calm voice. He killed without hesitation. He walked through destroyed camps with eyes that did not change. It was as if he had cut his heart out and buried it somewhere in the desert sands. Some of his men tried to understand him. Some feared him. Some admired him, but none of them truly knew him. At night, when they sat around the fire and the world was quiet, the men whispered about him, whispers carried low so the wind would not repeat them. "He doesn't sleep," one man said. "I heard he shot a man for snoring too loud," another claimed. "No," a third man whispered, "I think he just doesn't care anymore." Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain. Glanton felt no guilt. To the gang, the desert was more than empty land. It was a map of opportunities. Every trail, every canyon, every dry riverbed became a point of attack. They moved with purpose, with speed, with a deadly understanding of the terrain. They hid in places others feared to enter. They traveled at night when the sky went black and the stars flickered like dying fires. They struck in moments when their targets felt safest, and every time they disappeared back into the desert, leaving only silence behind. The Mexican authorities knew they had unleashed a force they could no longer control, but instead of stopping them, they tried to use them, offering more bounties, more freedom, more silver. It only made things worse. The gang grew richer. They grew bolder. They grew more violent, and Glanton's hunger grew faster than all of them. Soon, the Glanton gang's reputation reached the far edges of the frontier. People who had never seen them trembled at the mention of their name. Travelers stayed home. Ranchers refused to leave their land. Some towns even formed militias. Terrified that the gang might appear out of the heat haze, fear became part of everyday life. Children grew up hearing their parents whisper warnings. Merchants told stories of attacks to anyone who would listen, and all across the land, the same belief echoed. The Glanton gang was unstoppable, but the frontier had a strange way of balancing itself. The more a monster grew, the more the world slowly prepared to fight it. And while the gang believed they were untouchable, forces were rising on the other side, forces that would not stay silent forever. The desert of fire and fear would soon meet something even stronger: vengeance. As the Glanton gang tore across the frontier, leaving fear in every direction, something far more dangerous was happening deep inside their leader. John Glanton was changing. He had already crossed the line between lawman and outlaw, between hunter and murderer. But now, he crossed a line that only a few men in history ever dared to cross the line, where a man loses his soul. It was not one moment that changed him. It was not one battle or one crime. It was the weight of everything he had done, pressing into him day after day, until the part of him that once hesitated simply died. At first, Glanton still spoke to his men, still gave orders, still carried himself like a leader. But slowly, little pieces of humanity slipped away, first from his eyes, then from his voice, then from his heart. He became a man who walked through life without emotion, without fear, without mercy. Some men lose their souls in a single tragic moment. Glanton lost his piece by piece, like sand falling through open fingers. Those who looked into his eyes saw something chilling. They were not wild or frantic. They were empty, like the eyes of an animal that had accepted its nature long ago. He saw suffering without reacting. He saw fear without caring. He saw death without blinking. His men tried to read him, tried to understand him, but he was unreadable. Even men with violent pastmen, who had fought in wars, lost families, and killed to survive, felt uneasy around him. They had seen dangerous men before, but Glanton was different. He was not dangerous because of his rage. He was dangerous because of his calm. A calm man with a dead heart is impossible to predict at night. When the desert turned cold, the gang gathered around small fires. They ate what they had stolen, drank whatever they could find, and whispered stories to keep their minds from collapsing into fear. Glanton almost never joined them. He would sit away from the fire alone, silent, staring out into the darkness as if he expected something to come crawling out of it. Some men thought he was listening for enemies. Others thought he was watching the shadows move. But a few whispered a different thought, a darker thought. He's not watching the shadows. One man murmured one night, he's talking to them. The others fell silent. No one laughed. The idea did not sound like a joke. The idea felt real to real, because at times it seemed as if Glanton understood the darkness better than the daylight. The night did not frighten him. It welcomed him. The shadows seemed to bend around him, as if even they were careful not to touch him. Despite their fear, the gang followed him. They followed because he kept them alive. They followed because he gave them money. They followed because no one else could lead men as broken and violent as they were. But deep down, they followed because they were afraid of what would happen if they left him. One man tried to leave once. He rode off quietly before sunrise, hoping no one would notice. But Glanton noticed. He always noticed. He rode after the man and caught up with him by the river. The rest of the gang arrived just in time to see Glanton drag the man from his horse. "You ride with us," Glanton said, "or you die alone." The man begged, promised, and cried, but Glanton didn't care. He raised his gun and fired. The echo rolled across the water. The gang learned the message clearly. Glanton was not just their leader. He was their warning. No one tried to leave again. What made Glanton so terrifying was not his violence alone. Many outlaws were violent. Many men had killed. Many had committed terrible crimes. But Glanton had gone beyond that. He had become hollow. Killing no longer made his heart race. Fear no longer made his palms sweat. Death no longer felt like something final. It felt like part of his routine. He could kill a man and ride away as if he had dropped a stone in a river. Nothing stayed with him. Nothing haunted him. Nothing shook him. And that emptiness gave him power. Because a man who feels nothing, fears nothing. Even Apaches, who fought with the ferocity of warriors, felt uneasy when they encountered him. Some believed he carried a curse. Others believed he had lost his spirit, leaving behind nothing but a walking shell. But whatever he had become, one truth was clear. John Glanton was no longer just a man. He was a force driven, not by purpose, not by passion, but by something darker. There came a time when the Glanton gang feared their own leader more than any enemy. They watched him carefully, choosing their words, avoiding his stare. They noticed how he slept lightly, with his hand always touching the grip of his gun. They noticed how he ate little, but drank enough to dull something inside him. They noticed how he rode ahead of them, as if he couldn't stand being near anyone for long. One night, a new recruit asked an older member, what happened to him? Was he always like this? The older man stared at the fire for a long time before answering. No, he said quietly. He used to be a soldier. He used to be a man. But somewhere between the killing and the running, he left something behind. Maybe it was taken from him. Maybe he threw it away. But whatever it was, he ain't got it no more. What? The recruit whispered. The older man looked him in the eyes. His soul. As Glanton's heart grew colder, his ambitions grew larger. The gang's violence increased. Their raids became more reckless. Their greed became impossible to satisfy. They weren't just a gang anymore. They were a storm rolling across the desert. But even storms have centers come places where the danger is quietest and deadliest. John Glanton was the center of that storm, and ahead of him, another force was rising, one powerful enough to challenge even a man without a soul. The desert had fed his darkness long enough. Now, it was preparing to fight back. The desert had fed the Glanton gang for months, but even storms eventually need new ground to tear apart. Glanton understood this better than anyone. His men were tired from endless raids. The bounties were shrinking, and Mexican soldiers had begun to gather in numbers too large to ignore. Something had to change. They needed a new source of power, a new way to stay alive, a new way to make money. That change came in the form of a river, the Colorado. River was a lifeline cutting through the harsh frontier. Every traveler heading west or south needed to cross it. Wagons, riders, families, merchants, all of them depended on ferries to carry them from one side to the other. And at one narrow point, the river flowed through a place where travelers had only one choice: cross there or travel days out of the way. When Glanton first saw the river, he studied it with the eyes of a predator. He didn't see water. He saw opportunity. He saw control. He saw money. He saw a way to trap anyone who passed through. And so, the Glanton gang made a decision that would change their fate forever. They took over the Yuma Crossing ferry. The ferry was not much to look at: a wooden platform, ropes stretched across the river, and a rickety post where travelers paid their fare. But to the frontier, it was a crucial gate. Whoever controlled that gate controlled the land. At first, Glanton pretended to run it like a normal business. He and his men acted as ferry operators, taking payments and helping travelers cross. But the act didn't last long. Greed pushed them to demand more rand, more. Prices rose. Rules changed. Threats came easily. Travelers began to complain about being overcharged. Some were forced to pay everything they owned just to cross. Others were told to turn around. But the worst fate awaited those who argued with the gang, because Glanton did not tolerate arguments, and the river hid secrets well. Some travelers who refused to pay simply vanished. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just gone. People who crossed the river whispered that the water felt colder than usual, as if carrying something unseen. And soon, rumors began to spread. Don't anger the men at the ferry. If you do, you'll never reach the other side. For centuries, the Yuma tribe lived near the river, using its waters for life and trade. They had their own ferry operation long before outsiders arrived, fair, honest, and respectful of the land. But now, with Glanton in control, everything changed. His gang drove away Yuma boatmen. They stole materials. They attacked those who protested. Worst of all, they treated the land as if it belonged to them. The Yuma people watched with growing anger. They saw travelers robbed. They saw families abused. They saw peaceful crossings turned into violent traps. And they saw a gang of outsiders take what was never theirs to begin with. The Yumas were patient by nature, but they were not blind. They knew the desert held enough danger without imported cruelty. They began to whisper among themselves, "This cannot continue. These men bring death. They must be stopped." Like storm clouds forming on the edge of the sky, anger began to gather. But Glanton did not see it, or perhaps he simply did not care. For Glanton, running the ferry turned into a game of control. He stood on the riverbank with his arms crossed, watching travelers approach. His face carried no emotion, but his eyes told every newcomer the same message: "You will do what I say, or you will regret it." His gang followed his lead. They mocked frightened families. They beat travelers who could not pay enough. They robbed anyone who looked weak, and when tensions rose too high, they killed. The riverbanks soon became feared ground. Travelers approached with shaking hands, praying silently that Glanton might show mercy. But mercy was not a word he recognized. Some days, his men grew restless, arguing among themselves or drinking too much. But Glanton remained steady, carrying himself with the certainty of a man who believed nothing could harm him. He thought he controlled the river. He thought he controlled the land. He thought he controlled fate itself. He was wrong. The Yuma tribe lived nearby, and for a while they tolerated Glanton's presence. They hoped he would leave. They hoped the river would wash him away like many before him. But Glanton pushed harder. He raided Yuma camps, accusing them of interfering with his business. He stole their supplies. He beat their elders. In one incident, he even attacked a group of women gathering water, an act so offensive that anger spread through the tribe like lightning. The Yumas had seen violence before, but never like this. Glanton's cruelty felt endless. It felt poisonous. It felt like something that would grow until it swallowed them all if left unchecked. And so, they made a decision. A final decision. A decision that would change the story of the Glanton gang forever. In the weeks that followed, the Yumas watched the gang carefully. They noted every weakness, every routine, every moment the gang let its guard down. To Glanton, the quiet seemed normal. To the Yumas, it was preparation. At night, the tribe gathered around fires, speaking softly about the violence they had endured. They remembered their ancestors. They remembered their traditions. And they knew the time had come to protect their land. Glanton, meanwhile, believed everything was under control. The river was his. The ferry was his. The land was his. And the fear he created made him feel almost invincible. He did not sense the storm forming. He did not hear the whispers growing. He did not feel the danger tightening around him like a noose. He believed nothing could reach him. He believed he was untouchable. But storms strike hardest when the sky seems calmest, and the Yuma tribe was preparing to make sure that the man without a soul would finally meet something he could not kill. The Colorado River flowed quietly under the morning sun, looking calm and peaceful on the outside. But beneath its surface, the river carried secrets, dark secrets the Yuma tribe knew too well. Secrets that would soon swallow the Glanton gang whole. For weeks, the Yumas had watched, waited, and prepared. And now, the time for patience was over. The land around the ferry grew tense. Even the animals sensed the storm building in the air. Birds flew low and quiet. Coyotes kept to the hills. The wind blew strange and unsettled, as if it carried warnings that no one could understand except the Yumas. They moved silently through the desert, studying the gang's routines with careful eyes. They saw how the men slept too deeply after nights of drinking. They saw how their guard posts grew sloppy. They saw how Glanton walked with the arrogance of someone who did not believe anything could threaten him. And worst of all, they saw the violence continue. Every day, a new traveler was robbed. Every day, someone's life was ruined. Every day, Glanton pushed the tribe closer to the edge. The Yumas were finished allowing strangers to spill blood on their land. They were finished watching injustice poison their river. They were finished letting fear spread across their people. The decision had been made. The Glanton gang had to be destroyed, as the Yuma warriors prepared. Glanton's men grew careless. They celebrated loudly, drank heavily, and slept like men who believed the world bowed to them. The desert nights were filled with their shouts, their laughter, and their threats. But even among the gang, there were signs of unease. Some felt the land changing around them. They noticed how the UMass had grown distant and silent. They noticed the way shadows seemed to gather earlier each day. But whenever they tried to voice their concerns, Glanton shut them down with a stare that froze their words. "There's nothing out there," he would say. "They're afraid of us." And because no one dared challenge him, everyone nodded. But inside, doubt spread like cracks in dry earth. One night, near the fire, a young gang member whispered, "I feel watched." Another replied, "Everyone's watched out here." But the first man shook his head. "No, this is different. It feels like the desert itself is waiting." He was right. In the days before the ambush, the ferry crossing became strangely calm. Travelers seemed to avoid it. Even merchants, who normally risked everything to save time, chose to cross elsewhere. The riverbank felt empty, too empty. Glanton noticed, but he dismissed it as luck. "No trouble today," he muttered. Standing by the water, but trouble was already closing in. His men lounged nearby, leaning against rocks, cleaning weapons, or dozing in the shade. They had grown used to easy power, used to fear, used to killing without consequence. None of them believed their reign could end. The UMass watched them from the hills and brush. They listened to their voices. They counted their numbers. They studied the layout of the camp. They waited for the perfect moment. The elders of the tribe gathered under moonlight, their faces lit by soft fire. They spoke of the ancestors, of justice, of balance, and with one final nod, the warriors rose. It was time. The night before the ambush, everything felt too calm. The air hung heavy, as if holding its breath. The moon rose slow and pale, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The river glimmered faintly, reflecting the stillness of the sky. Glanton sat by the water alone. He stared at the reflection of his own face, hard-worn and unreadable. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Was it doubt? Was it exhaustion? No, it was nothing. Just his face staring back, empty as always. Behind him, the gang slept scattered around their camp, weapons lying in the sand, boots off, heads resting carelessly on saddlebags. They trusted Glanton. They trusted the river. They trusted their own brutality. None of them realized they were sleeping inside a trap, far beyond the firelight. The Yuma warriors moved like shadows. They carried bows, clubs, spears, all silent weapons, perfect for the dark. Their feet barely touched the sand. Their eyes were steady. They did not come for revenge alone. They came for protection. Protection of their land. Protection of their families. Protection of the sacred river that had fed them for generations. Just before dawn, when the desert air turned cold and the sky held the faintest hint of light, the UMass gathered at the edge of the camp. The world was silent. No birds. No wind. No movement. A Yuma elder raised his hand, and the attack began. Arrows flew first. Silent, swift, deadly. They pierced the camp from every direction, striking sleeping men before they could even breathe out a scream. Those who woke up did so in confusion. Rolling in the sand as shadows closed in on them, Yuma warriors rushed forward with clubs and spears, hitting hard and fast. Some gang members reached for guns, but many died before their fingers touched the triggers. The air exploded with shouts, metal clashing, and the crack of wood against bone. Glanton woke instantly, not from sound, but from instinct. He had sensed danger in his sleep, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless battles. He leaped up, grabbed his weapons, and scanned the chaos around him. He saw his men falling. He saw Yuma warriors surrounding them. He saw the attack he never believed would come. And for the first time in years, John Glanton felt a flicker of fear. The battle turned brutal. Glanton fought like a wounded animal, swinging his knife, firing his pistol, pushing through the swarm of warriors with raw strength. His fury was unmatched. His movements were quick and deadly. But the UMass were not ordinary enemies. They fought for home. They fought for honor. They fought as a united force, not as scattered individuals. One by one, the gang fell. Their screams echoed across the riverbank, blending with the roar of the water and the cries of Yuma warriors driving them toward their fate. The camp that once held power now held death. The ambush was only beginning. The end of the Glanton gang was coming, and no violence, no cruelty, no darkness could save them now. The attack came like lightning fast, bright and deadly. The Glanton gang, once feared across deserts and borders, now found themselves surrounded by a force stronger than greed, stronger than guns, stronger than the darkness they had carried for so long. The Yuma warriors had struck with precision. Their timing was perfect. Their rage had been building for months, and now it unleashed with unstoppable force. As dawn broke over the Colorado River, the battlefield glowed red with firelight and blood. Chaos exploded everywhere. Gang members stumbled from sleep, grabbing for guns they barely had time to load. Some tried to run, only to be caught by arrows silently slicing through the air. Others fought back blindly, swinging weapons without seeing who they were striking. But no matter what they did, they were overwhelmed. The UMAs had the advantage of surprise, unity, and purpose. The Glanton gang had nothing left but fear. The camp that once held stolen goods, weapons, and confidence quickly turned into a place of destruction. Wagons were overturned, fires spread, and the sand became coated in footprints and blood. Horses pulled free of their ropes and ran wildly into the desert. Screaming at the chaos, Glanton took in the scene with sharp eyes. Even in terror, he saw everything. He saw how many warriors there were. He saw how quickly his men were falling. He saw that this wasn't just a retaliation, it was an execution. He barked orders, shouting for his men to form a line, to fall back, to retreat toward the ferry. But the gang was too scattered, too drunk, too tired, too shocked to obey. Many were killed before they even heard his voice. The men who once followed him blindly now looked at him with desperate eyes. They didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a man who had led them into hell. The Yuma warriors fought with calm fury. They moved like water fast, flowing, coordinated. Every step had purpose. Every strike had meaning. They fought as protectors, not as raiders. Their land had been violated, their people threatened, and their patience pushed too far. Some used bows. Some used spears. Some used clubs carved from solid wood, and all of them aimed for the same goal: end the gang, end the cruelty, end the darkness. They didn't taunt or brag. They didn't drag out the violence. They struck with deadly efficiency, giving the gang a taste of fear they had forced on countless innocent lives. John Glanton was not a man who died easily. Even surrounded, even facing overwhelming odds, he fought with the same cold intensity he displayed in every raid. He fired his revolver with deadly accuracy. He swung his knife with practiced force. He moved through the chaos like a storm within a storm. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he might break through the line of warriors. It seemed possible that he could escape at least long enough to flee into the desert. But the UMAs were ready for him. They knew who he was. They knew he was the leader. They knew that if one man had to fall first, it was him. A group of the strongest warriors closed around him, cutting off his escape. They moved in with shields raised and weapons steady. Glanton roared a deep, furious sound that echoed across the riverbank. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't fear. It was pure rage. The last spark of a man who had lived his life inside violence. But rage could not save him now. By now, most of the Glanton gang was dead or dying. Their bodies lay scattered across the sand, twisted in unnatural shapes. Some still clutched weapons. Some lay face down in the dirt. Others stared blankly at the sky, their stories ending in silence. A few tried to surrender, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. But surrender meant nothing. The UMAS did not see men surrendering. They saw murderers, thieves, and tormentors. And the time for mercy had long since passed. Others tried to flee toward the river. But the current was strong and unforgiving. The water swallowed them whole, dragging them under as if reclaiming the souls. Taken by violence, the men who had once felt invincible now saw their world collapsing around them. Piece by piece, the Glanton gang was dying, and none of them could stop it. Glanton's fight raged on. His face was cut. His clothes were torn. His gun was empty. Blood dripped from his arm. Yet he fought with a fury that made him look almost inhuman. A Yuma warrior struck his hand, knocking his knife into the sand. Glanton lunged forward with his bare fists, punching, clawing, refusing to fall. He fought like a man who knew he had nothing left to lose. But even he reached his limit. A club struck his ribs. Another hit his shoulder. A spear grazed his side. A final blow cracked across his skull. Glanton fell to his knees. For the first time in years, he looked small. Just a man, exhausted, broken, powerless. He lifted his head and stared defiantly at the warriors surrounding him. Even then, there was no apology in his eyes. No regret, no fear, just emptiness. And with one last strike, the UMass ended the life of the most feared outlaw on the frontier, John Joel Glanton, the butcher. The raider, the soul killer, was no more. As the sun rose over the battlefield, the Yuma warriors began the slow work of reclaiming their land. They burned the gang's camp. They destroyed their stolen goods. They pushed broken wagons into the river. They made sure no sign of the gang's cruelty would remain. The river.com once more carried away ashes and debris. It washed the blood from the sand. It washed away the memory of violence. For the first time in months, the land felt peaceful. The storm the Glanton gang brought had finally burned itself out. The fall of the Glanton gang spread across the frontier like wildfire. Travelers, settlers, tribes, everyone heard the story. Some celebrated. Some breathed sighs of relief. Some shuddered, wondering how such a gang existed at all. But one lesson remained clear. When cruelty grows too large, the world finds a way to fight back. John Glanton believed he was unstoppable. But the river, the land, and the people proved him wrong. His reign ended not with glory, but with justice. When the last echoes of battle faded along the Colorado River, the land fell into a heavy silence. Smoke drifted above the burned remains of the Glanton gang's camp, rising slowly into the morning sky like the final breath of a nightmare that had finally come to an end. The Yuma warriors stood among the ruins, exhausted but steady. They had not fought for glory. They had not fought for revenge alone. They had fought for the protection of their people, their land, and the sacred river that had carried life through the desert for generations. John Glanton's body lay still, no longer a threat, no longer a force of fear. He looked like any other man, small, fragile, human. But the memory of the darkness he carried would not be forgotten. The fall of the Glanton gang was more than a victory. It was a lesson carved into the history of the frontier, like a scar across the desert floor. In the weeks that followed, the river crossing slowly returned to normal. The Yuma tribe reclaimed what had been taken from them. They repaired boats, gathered supplies, and reopened the ferry for travelers, this time with fairness, respect, and honesty. Families who had once feared crossing the river now found safety again. Merchants who had changed their routes slowly returned. The desert paths, once soaked with terror, grew warmer with the footsteps of people seeking a future. But no one forgot what happened. No one forgot the gang that ruled with cruelty. No one forgot the man who led them. Whispers carried across towns and settlements. Stories were told around campfires, each one painting Glanton not as a hero or an outlaw, but as something far darker. Parents warned their children, "Do not let greed take you down the path John Glanton walked." Travelers spoke his name with caution, and whenever the wind blew across the Colorado River, some swore it carried echoes of the past. John Glanton had lived a life without mercy, without compassion, without soul. But even the darkest men leave shadows behind. His story spread far beyond the desert, carried by travelers, soldiers, and survivors. Some described him as a monster. Others called him a warning. A few, especially those who never saw his cruelty firsthand, called him a misunderstood warrior. But the truth was simple. Glanton became exactly what he chose to become. He was not born evil. Life pushed him. War shaped him. Greed twisted him, and power finished him in the end. He was not a product of fate. He was a product of his own choices. His darkness was not something that landed on him. It was something he carried, nurtured, and unleashed. The men who followed Glanton were not innocent. They chose violence. They chose fear. They chose to ride behind a man who led them into darkness. But many of them followed because they were broken, lost, and desperate. They were men who never felt part of the world. Men who believed violence was their only language. Men who found themselves drawn to Glanton's certainty, mistaking it for strength. But certainty built on cruelty is not strength. It is weakness disguised as power. When the gang died, their stories died with them. Few were mourned. Few were remembered. Their names faded into silence, swallowed by the same river that washed away their crimes. Only Glanton's name survived, but not as he might have wanted. He was remembered not as a warrior, but as a warning. The American frontier was a harsh place, but it had a way of balancing itself. It allowed freedom, but it punished those who abused it. It rewarded courage, but it destroyed greed. It offered opportunity, but it crushed those who tried to take more than they deserved. Glanton believed he could outrun judgment forever, but no one escapes forever. The land watched him. The river watched him. The people watched him. And when the time was right, justice came not in a courtroom, but on the battlefield. Justice came in the form of a tribe defending their home. Justice came with arrows, spears, and fierce courage. Justice came from those he underestimated. His end was not slow or dramatic. It was swift. It was decisive. It was deserved as the years passed. The story of John Glanton sank deeper into the folklore of the West. Writers, travelers, and historians spoke of him with fascination. Some saw him as a symbol of the Wild West's chaos. Others saw him as a villain whose darkness represented the dangers of unchecked power. His legend grew, but it grew in shadows. He was the outlaw mothers warned their children about. He was the ghost riders claimed to see near the Colorado River. He was the reminder that the line between man and monster is thinner than anyone wants to believe. Yet beneath all the stories, one truth remained. Glanton's life showed what happens when a man stops listening to his conscience. The death of the Glanton gang marked a turning point on the frontier. It taught communities to stand together. It taught travelers to be cautious. It taught leaders to think before unleashing violence for profit. And it taught everyone that no matter how strong an outlaw becomes, there is always someone stronger. Glanton's story became a mirror reflecting the dangers of greed and cruelty. People used his name as a symbol of what happens when darkness is allowed to grow without limits. And in that way, strangely, he served a purpose he never intended. He became a lesson. The river flowed on, washing away the footprints of the past. The desert bloomed again after seasonal rains. Children grew into adults who heard stories of the gang, but never lived in fear of them. The Yuma tribe continued to protect their land with quiet pride. The world moved on. The frontier changed. New dangers came, and old ones faded. But one thing stayed the same. The story of John Joel Glanton lived on. A dark reminder of the evil one man can bring, and the justice a community can deliver. In the end, Glanton left behind no family, no legacy, no honor. Only a warning written in the blood-soaked sand of the West Dot. A warning carried by the wind. A warning remembered by history. A warning that echoes even now. Darkness may rise, but it always